Ola Degteva, welcome to the Marketing Study Lab podcast.
Thank you, Peter. So happy to be with you.
And first and foremost, apologies for any mispronunciation of surnames.
No, absolutely correctly.
At this time. Okay, excellent. Mispronunciation or not, I always like to start with a random opener. So this week's random opener for yourself, Ola, is if you could live anywhere in the world rent-free, where would it be?
Well, right now, I would say it will be Wales.
Oh, wow, cool.
Pembrokeshire, but it's just because we've been on holidays there. And the place is amazing.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. I think we're going to explore Wales soon, actually. Really looking forward to it because I've never really explored. Been there a few times, but not really done anything major. But everybody says it's stunning and beautiful. So really looking forward to that.
Yes, it's stunning.
Aces, let's get on to more important things. And firstly, what I'd like you to do is just introduce yourself. What's your story? What brings you up to this stage of your career? And what are you up to right now?
Well, that's interesting because my first career was actually far away from marketing. I was working in linguistics and language teaching. And at some point, my boyfriend then and me decided that we should start a family. And so I had to move to join him in Cyprus, which took me away from all my set working environment, and I had to start anew. I didn't want to stop my teaching career, so I went to the university to get my master's degree in language teaching and linguistics. By that time, my husband had already been running a very successful online business. And when we started the family, our baby was young. She was just a baby. We decided we didn't have to settle down in one place, but we might have this freedom of traveling around probably. Mm-hmm. And it's not conducive to teaching careers. So I joined him in business. And it was 10 years ago. Since that, I've learned quite a lot and still learning. Mm-hmm. Somewhere on the way, I picked up and mastered digital advertising because we needed it for business. And so here I am, 10 years later, doing completely different things, so enjoying it greatly.
Fantastic. So it was almost due to necessity that you found this way of working and through family business and stuff like that, which is really, really cool. I like that. And usually, or sometimes, the best careers are the ones that you weren't really expecting.
That's true. Yeah.
So can you just explain what you're up to right now? What do you do?
So right now, we're still in online business, mm-hmm. and I'm doing a lot of content-orientated work. So our mainstream business is what you might call content marketing and mm-hmm. lead generation. However, I have several or a few clients for whom I do digital advertising. Okay. I would say whom I show how to do digital advertising.
Yes. Okay, excellent. That's fantastic. So today what I thought we'd do, if that's okay with you, is look at more the analytical side of that. Take a little whiz through that and any actionable tips you can give us. Fantastic. So first and foremost, I think everybody would agree that data isn't the problem. We've all got access to some data in some way, shape or form, regardless whether it's our own, whether we buy it, whether we're part of some kind of software package, whatever it is. But how do we know what data we should be looking for? Where do we start with all this?
That's a good question, because as you said, there is a lot of data around. And if you just take everything, it's like bottomless pit. So you can get lost there very quickly. But when you start your digital campaign, whatever it is, whatever platform you use, you never start with nothing. You start with a theory or something that you envisage. You say, for example, that let's say you're selling something through your website. and you say that this group of people are very interested in my product and I'm sure they will buy definitely. Then there is another group of people that might be interested, but don't know for sure.
Mm.
And then maybe you want other people just to get to know your product, to learn about it. So you plan your campaigns for these different groups of people. And then that's where data is important. So for the first group, for example, you would be looking at conversions. That were what you want to achieve with them because you think they are the ones that buy definitely. For the next group of people, the ones that you want to get interested in it, you would be looking at the interaction rate. Because if your interaction rate is satisfactory, your prediction about them being interested in your product is correct. And if you look at group number 3, just the people you think you want them to know about your product more, you're not convinced they will buy from the first attempt. Mm-hmm. You would be looking at impressions because this is the biggest group. You would be looking at impressions and their interaction rate. This is very narrow, it's just an example, because a lot depends on what kind of business you're doing online. What is your product? What's your audience? When you go so niche, you slice, you segment your data. And for every niche, it will be different. There will be nuances that you have to fit with your audience, fit with your business.
And I think that's massively underrated, really, in that when people look at data, we're all, I suppose, susceptible in those 3 points that you mentioned. So the first one, going backwards, impressions, likes, comments, that kind of thing. We're all susceptible to that. A bit vanity, really. A bit how popular am I? Put your hands up if you like me, kind of thing. And then the interactions, then the conversions. The closer you get to that point of purchase, it's really interesting that we can almost categorize people into these different sections, and then look at particular data points for each one.
Yes.
Really like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we can, like you said, slice this data and almost segment our market, which, music to my ears, love all that kind of stuff. Fantastic, great stuff. But how do we gain actionable insights? So we're getting these conversions, these interactions, and we can see all these numbers and figures. But how do we actually get any insight from this? And do you have a process that you'd use?
Yes, I do. And when I don't like the word coach, but I don't know how else to define it. When I show my partners how to do advertising for their business, because I'm a big fan of small businesses doing their own advertising, not outsourcing it. So I always say, first thing you need to do is to know where you stand and know your benchmarks. Nothing happens in emptiness. So when you define what kind of business you are, you can establish benchmarks to which you'd compare your results. And it's not really difficult because you can use WordStream, for example. Every year they produce amazing benchmarks reports. You can go there, you can find your industry. For example, you are e-commerce and you're in pet industry. And you can see exactly what click-through rates are in Google advertising, in Bing advertising for your industry, what conversion rates are, what cost per acquisitions are. And of course, it's average. It doesn't give you precise picture, but it gives you this benchmark. You compare your cost per acquisition with the average of the industry. And if it's the same, just a bit below, just a bit above, you're okay. If the difference is too big, maybe you're doing something wrong. Maybe you need to dig in deeper. Also, you can have benchmarks in your Google Analytics. There is benchmark reports, so you can gain some insights from there. So when you know where you stand compared to your peers across the world, you can compare different channels, and that's the best, because what the benchmark gives to you, it can gives you, for example, your key performance indicators on shopping ads, on display ads, which are very different channels, on your search ads. So again, it will give you more insight into where you can perform worse probably and what you need to improve.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when you look at your, when I get new accounts and people ask me, can you look through my advertising account, see how is it, how well it's performing? I always say how well my site performing or how well is my Google Ads account performing is not the right question. So you need to ask where I perform not as well as my peers. What channels can I actually improve? Or maybe what audiences? And that's why benchmarking is very important.
I really find it interesting that you use the word benchmarking, and that it's almost external information within an industry that you're utilizing to understand where you are as a company. Because I think as marketers, and I'm susceptible to it, and a lot of people are in our industry, and this is where we kind of fall foul to certain things, is that you could almost ignore that data because you're afraid that you won't succeed, or it's seen as a lesser than the average, and you're not doing as well as you thought you were. But showing that information, I think, is hugely important, because it shows where you are and it shows any improvement. And if you're good at what you do, that data should help you get better and back up the fact that you've improved things for your company. So I'm a big fan of things like that.
Well, absolutely true. Also, even if you an advertising manager and you run accounts for clients, it's not your business. It's a good thing to do for your client, because then you can show them where they are in this huge business field, where they stand. You can also show them, this is where we started, this is where you are right now. Or if you, a business owner yourself, and you want to outsource your advertising, you come to a company and they say, oh, of course we can do a lot for you. With our last client, we achieved 500% on return on ad spend. And at this point, you have to ask a question, is it good? Is it bad? What does it mean, 500%? If you work in e-commerce, and if you run shopping, just a shopping campaign, 500% is all right. It's not a bad result at all. If you sell software, subscription software, 500% is amazing, because your clients return to you and they pay every year. But if it's branding campaign, for example, for e-commerce, 500% is not really good. So you always need to dig in what these numbers mean. Build a context around data, build a story.
And I think that's what a lot of people don't do. It's that put it in the context, because, like you rightly said, every industry will have different averages, will have different percentages, will have different things they need to focus on, and that goes back to segmenting your market and all that kind of stuff. But one thing that I want to cover and go into after we've just been bigging up the fact that you can get data from external parties and everything, is that some of this data, some of this information, we don't know how legitimate it is, and also we might find that there are gaps in that data, particularly if it's secondary or external information. So how do we spot those gaps, and what do we do about these gaps if we find any?
Well, I guess when it comes to gaps, data itself probably doesn't have gaps. In our story, our way of interpreting data might have certain gaps. So if we narrow it down to e-commerce, and we are not speaking about big data when we collect tons of information about our customers, because it's quite a different conversation. But if it's advertising data and it's like that essential information you collect, as long as you build up a story which is supported by data, you can always understand what's missing. You can have a look at trends, for example, and all of a sudden you notice that last week trend compared to the previous week and compared to the same week last year is very downward. So you look at what changes have you implemented probably in your account, and you didn't do any changes, so that's not internal factor. So that's where you have to start to dig in. You look at your channels, you find where the downward trend comes from. You look at what's happening around. Like this year is, I'm afraid, but I'm going to use this word, is unprecedented.
Yeah, you have to get it in there.
It's literally, you can't rely on any normal data processing. You can't compare it to last year and say, oh yes, it's normal. We have this downward trend because it happens every summer because of bank holidays. Nothing works the same way this year. So you can attribute quite a lot to different customer behavior depending on the circumstances in which we live. But there can be also gaps in your data story. When you use a lot of platforms, you advertise on Facebook, you advertise on Google Ads, your Facebook data tells you just got 100 conversions from Facebook. Your Google Ads tells you had 100 conversions from Google Ads. So you think, cool, 200 conversions. You go to Google Analytics and it says that all in all, you had 150. So there is a gap in your story for your client or for your own business. You have to dig in and see whether this difference is real and where it comes from. So obviously Facebook and Google Ads treat conversions differently, and Facebook will attribute everything to itself, while Google Analytics will do it a bit differently. So yeah, as long as you know how your data is being tracked, and as long as you know that in your story, everything actually is logical and answers the questions. So I guess that's it.
Mm-hmm. I think you picked up a good point there, that different platforms might see conversions differently and attribute certain conversions differently dependent on how they see a conversion. And when you're looking at different pieces of software that are owned by different companies, you'll always get those types of discrepancies. And it's almost understanding, maybe not even the why, but what's the most important truth for you, and work off that basis, because then we've got a benchmark, then we've got a starting point, then we can see what's positive and what's negative, which leads me very, very nicely onto the next question, which is, how many platforms should we be looking at monitoring or using to get all this analysis and info?
Yes, well, I'm a big proponent of minimalism. However, you can't go just by minimum with everything. You need something centralized. So for a big average data, Google Analytics is perfect. It will average everything nicely for you. It will show you actually quite good that data segmentation on channels. So whether it's your email campaigns, your social media, your search, whether it's Google or Bing. But you have to be very careful with Google Analytics. And sometimes, well, just like I gave you an example about conversions, the readings will be different. If you run an e-commerce platform and if you do, one of the very important points to track is your returning visitors and new visitors. And for example, if your e-commerce store is built in Magento, so you have access to all Magento data, and you will look at your returning visitors, returning customers in Magento, the number will be different from what you can see in Google Analytics. So again, what are you going to use in this case? I'd always recommend use your primary data, use your Magento, because it's much more precise. In Google Analytics, if Google can't decide where your customer comes from, if they come directly, if they clean their cookies recently, if they use private browsing, even if they are not your first customer, even if they have bought from you 3 times, 4 times, if they come to a site this way, Google will classify them as new customers. While Magento will look at their payment information, because that's what they submit there, and Magento will classify it correctly. So again, for whole picture, I always look at Google Analytics. For details, I would look at Google Ads, I would look at Magento data, I would look at LinkedIn, Facebook, but very carefully, because as I said, because of the difference how every platform tracks conversions. However, it helps when you look at everything and then just decide what your main central point of data is and be consistent.
Yeah, consistency. I think that final word there, consistency, absolutely key. Going back to those benchmarking and working out how well you've done. You don't want to be jumping from one ship to another, because that's just gonna whole world of discrepancies are just gonna pop up, and you're not going to get anywhere if you do that. I find it really interesting that to find the little bits of info that highlight the differences between the software and how they categorize things. And even going from your own website analytics and Magento, it's like, how can they be so different? Because it's the same site. Yeah, perfectly explained what you just said then. Fantastic.
Just a different way of collecting data can bring you such different picture. And you can't say that Facebook is wrong or Google Ads is wrong. No, they're all right. They're just right in a different way. So as long as you build a consistent picture and use like a consistent central data point collection, then you will probably see or present it to your client in a clearer way.
Mm-hmm. So you've mentioned a few online platforms or pieces of software there where we can get info from. What are your top online platforms for data analysis and collecting info then?
Google Analytics.
Okay.
Especially, well, depending on the business again, but with our main business being content-based, you can't beat Google Analytics. There are so many platforms that would offer you a simpler way to look at data. They're paid.
Mm-hmm.
As a small business, you don't need any paid platforms unless you come to a certain point in your business where you need to push forward or where you're rebuilding something on your website. So it's a complete reorganization. You reorganized your links, you changed things, and now you just want to see whether you did everything correctly, whether you didn't make any vital mistakes. So at this point, you can, for example, subscribe to Ahrefs just for once, and you can use it to scan your website and see whether there are any broken links, whether there are any big issues. It's not a cheap software, and that kind of software is not cheap. And that's why I'm saying you don't need it on a regular basis. If you're not an agency that running SEO optimization for clients, don't use it month after month after month. Subscribe once, do it, cancel the subscription. You're probably covered till your next upgrade comes or your next revamping of the website. But Google Analytics, you will get everything there. It's actually very comprehensive. Yes.
I'm sure. They won't be too happy in you saying that for Hrefs and all that kind of stuff.
So I'm a big fan of Hrefs.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think they're totally amazing. The whole approach, they're actually one of the companies that can teach you how to do online marketing, how to connect with your customers. They are amazing, and the technology is great, and what they can teach you in their videos, how you do things, how you do your content marketing, how you write, the tips, they're great.
I think that was a bit flippant of me to actually say that, because if you think about it, you could go on their platform, use them once, and if you're a small business, like you said, that's fine. That is all you need. And then the engagement they might give you, you go back, you get their tips, their information, and they are helping you to grow and giving you tips and information, helping you to grow for free. And when you hit a certain level and you need their help, you're willing to pay for it, because then it becomes affordable and all that kind. So it makes perfect sense why they'd give you a trial, they'd give you things for free, they'd help you build and allow you to build and not give them any money up front, because they're playing the long game, and it's always the right game.
Absolutely. Yes.
Love it. Right. We're going to move from long game to short game here. So, Ola, are you ready for some quick fire questions?
Okay.
Excellent. Right. What was the last thing you remember Googling?
Funnily enough, last thing I Googled was walks in Pembrokeshire.
Brilliant.
Yes, just before we went on holidays.
More people should be Googling that. Absolutely. What's the most important thing to know about marketing right now?
It's such a complex body. There are no different segments that can be more important than other segments in marketing. And as a modern marketer, the word marketing comes from last century. It might be not a correct word, but we adopted it. So we have to go with it. However, it implies so much more nowadays. It's when you build your online business, that's what we call online marketing. It's building an online business. Everything is important there. You should start with engineering, with technology. You get your website as a foundation. You need to know how the website works. When I came into this field, I actually learned how to build a simple website using just CSS and HTML and a simple grid system. Not because I wanted to become a website builder. I needed to understand how it works, how your website structure affects your SEO, how using different frameworks affect the speed of your site. So yes, I learned a bit of a bootstrap. How, there are so many frameworks now that makes building websites easier, but are they good enough? I needed to understand that. So I learned Elementor, I learned different theme builders and page builders, because it's such a big, huge part of your online business. And then you go to content. It's all interconnected. You need to know how you write a content that can produce it, and you can monetize, that can make you money. If you do advertising, how your advertising fits in with your natural organic traffic. What's more important for your business? Is it advertising on top, organic traffic down at the bottom? Or, as this whole situation showed us, maybe it's on the contrary, maybe you should actually invest in your organic traffic more. Maybe this is what is most important. And then just put advertising on top. Everything works in such a synergy in online business. As a business owner, unfortunately, you need to know these things. Not deep, because you still can outsource, but you need to understand what you want from those people to whom you outsource. I always remember, and that was so funny, there was an interview with a business owner, the person who built a funnel system. And he said when he started, he used to hire two IT guys. One would build something for him, and the other would check how it was built. And it's this knowledge that is very valuable now. If you are given something and you don't understand what is it you are given and how it works, you might not succeed actually in the online business. Every component is very important. So this is kind of you have to constantly learn.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just having that basic knowledge in a whole host of different elements of marketing, one, it makes you a better all-rounded marketer, which I'm a huge fan of. But two, it makes sure that if you are using agencies or external resources or other people, you know what to expect from them. You might not be able to do it, you might not be as skilled as they are, but you know the basics, and you know you can potentially work out how they can benefit you or how good they are at actually what they say they do.
That's it, exactly. That's very important.
So, two more questions, most important for me, to be fair. But the first one is, why do you love what you do?
Online business is an amazing field where you can meet people who have absolutely bonkers ideas. And you think sometimes, wow, that's just impossible. That just can't work. And then you start talking to them and you understand it actually can work.
Mm-hmm.
The passion that people bring with their own ideas and wanting to grow them and turn them into something viable is inspiring.
Yeah.
So just meeting these people keeps me inspired.
Yeah, I agree. I love it. So, final question. If people want to find out more about you and what you do, where should they go?
Well, LinkedIn, obviously, or they can just Google my name and it's all over.
Fantastic. Ola Degteva, hopefully I've got that right. Thank you so much for joining me. Absolute pleasure to have you on today.
It was a pleasure to speak to you, Peter. Thank you for having me.